Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from around the world. Welcome to today's panel discussion. My name is Chris Rainey, co-founder, CEO here at HR Leaders, and I'll be your host for today's session where we're talking about how to use HR data and people analytics to drive organizational competitiveness. Let me introduce you to our amazing panelists. First up, we've got Wendy Hirsch, Vice President of Workforce Planning Analytics at Eaton, Stephen Bianchi, Chief People and Operating Officer at Beamery, Hallie Bregman, Global Head of People Analytics at PTC, Brian Dames, Chief Strategy Officer at Safeguard Global, and Gustavo Canton, Global Analytics Leader at Starbucks. How are you all doing today?
Great,
thanks for having us.
Well, thanks.
Fantastic.
Excited.
We're good.
Thank you.
Hallie, I tried my best.
You did good, Chris.
Where are you all joining from today? I'll start with you, Brian. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in Austin, Texas, where our global headquarters are.
Amazing. Hallie?
I'm in Boston, Massachusetts.
Nice. Steve?
I'm in Northamptonshire, England.
Oh, that threw me off. I wasn't expecting that one. Wendy?
Sunny Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh, that makes us jealous. Gustavo?
I'm in Atlanta, although it's not very hot these days.
Oh, really? Before we go any further, Brian, for those that are new that are joining us, give everyone a kind of quick overview of Global Fluency as an introduction, and then we'll jump into the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And by the way, thank you to all the panelists for joining. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. The concept of Global Fluency, Safeguard Global, if you don't know, is a company. We work with hundreds and hundreds of multinationals in various ways, helping them kind of manage and deploy their global workforce. And inevitably, the question we get at some point in the engagement, and sometimes many times, is how do I stack up as a multinational employer? How do I compare to my peer group? How do I compare to the rest of the market? Am I falling behind in any areas? Do I need to get better in others? And historically, we've always had sort of a very anecdotal answer to that question. So instead, we set out to have a more quantified fact base by which we can answer the question. And we embarked on a journey that involved a pretty extensive 200 company research project, which we followed on with an additional 50 multinationals that we considered best in class. And what we found was there's really three main categories with lots of layers within them that distinguish the proficiency of one multinational in the way that they employ and manage their workforce than another. The first category is really what you know about the markets that you're in and the markets that you wish to be in or are evaluating to be in. As we know, to employ internationally is very, very complex. So there are cultural nuances, there's currency in some cases, employment law, tax regulation, available talent in given markets. That's a lot of complexity when you're either employing in a particular country or evaluating whether to employ in another. And the more that you know about your available options, the more proficient you're going to be. And we call that intellect, like how much knowledge do you have about the markets you're in and you wish to be in. The second category, which we're going to talk a lot about today, is sort of know-how. So how do you apply that knowledge in ways that makes you more proficient? So everything that I talked about, whether it's employment law or tax regulation, currency-related conversion, all of those things manifest themselves in forms of data. And an organization's ability to connect to that data, to normalize that data in a way that makes it usable, to distribute that data to shareholders so it's in close proximity to the people that need to decision on it. That's the know-how category that we call acumen. And then there's a third that we call agility, which is really the use in that data and being nimble and reacting to market shifts and changes, which we'll talk about in a future webcast. But very excited to talk with the experts today about that acumen category, which is really the connectivity to data that serves as the foundation for analytical decision-making for a workforce.
Amazing. I'm glad I asked you to explain that, Brian. I had to do it myself as well. And I couldn't think of a better group to bring together. So thank you again for everyone being here. Hallie, I did promise I'm going to pick on you first, so I'm definitely going to live up to that. What prevents organizations from successfully integrating their systems? And how would you recommend they navigate those challenges?
Yeah, I think this is a question that every organization faces, especially global organizations. So PTC has over 90 offices across the world, every country and region. And so that means we've got different technologies, different processes, different systems, right? And so just the volume of sheer difference in the technology, in the processes is the first major obstacle, right? So how do you put together something that, if I just take, for example, ethnicity, this is a question that's, a data point that's top of mind right now, something we asked all of our employees in the US, something we're really used to asking folks in the US. Ethnicity doesn't mean the same thing across the world, right? This is simply an attribute, not necessarily a system, but coming from your human capital management systems, thinking about all of the different attributes and the different ways you can think about them, huge obstacle. The other major obstacles are around people, right? And prioritization. So how many systems do you have and what do you prioritize integrations for, right? It takes time and resources to put systems together. More and more, we're getting better and better at out-of-the-box integrations and thinking through how easy we can make it. But until it's literally the click of a button, it takes people, it takes resources. And so putting that all together, being able to have the visibility across all the systems to prioritize them all and then have the people to do the integrations, it's a big effort.
Yeah.
So Hallie, one of the interesting things that came out of the Fluency research is 50% of all the companies that we talk to are still, and this is specific to payroll data. So maybe some of the most sensitive information in the HR organization. 50% of the organizations that we talk to are still emailing spreadsheets and PDF. 50%. Which
No doubt.
Crazy to me. I was like, wow, I cannot believe it's that high. So that's just it. It's hard enough to do this stuff domestically. When you start extending to all of these international systems and all the nuances of data that we talked about, it's incredibly complex. It's really tough stuff.
Well, I'd say even if you're able to bring together all those disparate sources, right? So, Haley, you talk about how do we bring them all together? And we have what we put out there as common definitions. I think the harder part is the fact that how they get used is very different from country to country. So even though we might say, okay, this is what this data point is intended for and the values you need to enter, how each country uses it and interprets it is very different, which makes analytics a little more challenging because you roll it up and you think it means something, and to others it means something different.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would say on the upside, now with COVID and all of the disruption happening, I feel that organizations are waking up to the fact that we definitely need to do some streamlining of our technology and enable more and invest more in certain areas that perhaps in the past were not invested before. And now people has become a very important component. I will tell you, I am actually optimistic looking at what is happening in the world in terms of how analytics groups are kind of rising to the occasion. And for me personally, the way I think we need to go about this is we need to design systems from the experience of the end user, meaning our workforce or customers or communities, and go backwards. And that sounds like a very simple concept to have, but the reality is that in the past that has not been the case. We have different functions working with different strategies, with different data roadmaps, and that creates a lot of confusion. But if we go back and reassess and think about, hey, how do we provide a superb experience for our internal stakeholders and our customers, I think that's going to help us bring some clarity into how to design these systems and how to invest and provide the right resourcing for it, because obviously IT is super constrained, like many other areas. Analytics teams have constraints, and there is a balance that we have to play with it.
I think, Gustavo, also, it all comes back to operational excellence, right? So if we have all of these systems, they're disconnected, we're sending data via spreadsheets, it's inefficient. It's leaving money on the table. It's not, making the best of our resources. So I think while it is difficult to put them all together, it is incredibly important. And incredibly important to democratize all of those systems, to not have silos, to not have one pocket using something and another pocket using something else, right? We can bring it all together and make everything talk to each other and be, able to make decisions and get data, at the snap of fingers.
I think I think just on that point though, there's been a significant shift, and it used to be a lot about efficiency of connections of systems and integration. And there was at Deutsche Bank, Dr. Steve Taylor and I used to use this way to explain it to people that good information management would lead to great management information, right? So doing exactly those points about connecting systems and focusing on efficiency. However, to Gustavo's point, I think what's changing now is this whole concept of experience. It means you have to optimize for effectiveness of the system, and the effectiveness is determined by the perception of the person experiencing whatever that outcome is. So it's almost like you're backing into something where you're designing a system that can be consumed in a hyper-personalized way for everybody. But then behind the scenes, you still have to be incredibly smart and clever in terms of how you connect it to make sure that you don't have, 50% of your stuff as spreadsheets, or sometimes it's not even complicated mistakes. I mean, between European offices or UK offices and American offices, day, month, year versus month, day, year, that can totally mess up your numbers, right? And I'm sure that's happened to everybody, right? But that's something that an employee or an end user, a candidate, should not even have to think about, because the experience is really what you optimize for, and it's really shifting that perception, I think.
In the most simplest form, these issues turn into real hard dollar cost. So if you think about the layers of value, at the most basic level, it's compliance. And, we estimate on one side of our business in the way that we help companies deploy their workforce, we estimate 60% of the companies that we work with, we initially find compliance issues with. 60%. And that is a manifestation of not being able to, first of all, not maybe knowing some things that you should know before you employ, but then also managing that data properly. And that's the most basic level of value, right? And then you start building on, as you said, with efficiency, and then you start building on value add around decisioning. But there's ROI to be had just in the most basic form from what we've seen.
I couldn't agree more. The thing is, it becomes increasingly difficult. I mean, to sell compliance internally and have a CFO, for instance, sign off on that, usually makes sense. However, in the theme of the discussion as well, in terms of how do we use people analytics to drive organizational competitiveness, I can't compete on being compliant. Right. So, and it's hard sometimes to make that business case internally to show why you need to invest above and beyond being acceptable. And I think that's new measures. I mean, I think COVID and the whole working at home thing has really challenged organizations to think about what are those new ROI measures nowadays. People are starting to look to remote opportunities quite often from a business sense as, it might be cheaper to hire outside of an expensive city. But actually, once you make that decision for whatever reason, you quickly find yourself saying, okay, but how do I compete in that environment? How do I win in that environment? How do I make it a great experience in that environment? I'm not sure if people have cracked that yet, but the world's changing over the past few months. I totally echo what you said.
And I just wanted to say that I feel that we have a responsibility to educate the organization in understanding that this is not extra cost. Like when you invest on these things, it's not so much an extra cost, it's that there is a lot of hidden costs underneath the iceberg that is actually a positive trade-off. I think that's a message that we sometimes miss when we talk to the executive team and say, hey guys, I'm asking for X amount of extra dollars to get this investment, but you're going to actually save in efficiency this amount of Y dollars. And just to give you an example, there is a study from Harvard Business Review, 2018, I believe, and they were talking about the cost of imperfect data. And if you were to do something like, let's say, 100 things and $1 per thing, it would cost you $100. But if you have 80% of your data that is okay and 20% that is not reliable, it would actually cost you 10 times for that non-reliable data to do the same thing. So if you do the math, it will be about $278 to do the whole thing. It's almost 3 times the amount of effort, efficiency, and cost to get it done on the wrong side. So I think that's something that we need to keep hammering away in terms of communicating that this is actually going to take away a lot of that cost that the companies sometimes not able to see in the first place, right?
Where would you that was a lot of information for everyone to take in, but it was amazing. So thank you so much so far. A few people are asking, any kind of practical steps to where to start in this? What advice would you give to people in terms of just the first initial, and the many of you that are pretty far on the journey in this, but for others who are perhaps just starting their journey, what advice would you give for where they should start? Because it's kind of a lot to take in there as well.
I mean, PTC is pretty early in building people analytics and kind of thinking about how we use our data, and fundamentally it's platform, right? It's security and it's stakeholder relationships. And so putting it all together, right, before we get to any of the cool analytics and the insights that we're kind of known for, but it's taking an inventory, it's doing the non-sexy audit and figuring out all of the data, all of the processes, and then figuring out ways to see, visualize, whatever, all of the data in aggregate as in high volume as you can, because it's very hard to say, well, this part is wrong, we need to fix that process, and this system needs to be integrated one by one. You kind of need that 3,000 level view where you can look down and say, okay, these are the biggest problem areas, and now we're going to prioritize improving these areas so that we can start to get some return on our investment, and then we'll take those littler areas and prioritize them later on.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, go ahead, Wendy. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I would just say as a cautionary note, right, to be a little careful what you wish for, in the sense that sometimes once you put something out there, everybody wants it. And not only do they want it, they want to cut 5 ways to Sunday. So be cautious, right, about what you put out there, that you can sustain what it is that you produce. Because while it might look great and you're like, I want to put my best foot forward and put this out there, if you can't do it repeatably, reliably, you're going to have trouble. Yeah. So I think that being very pragmatic out of the gate is probably really important.
Yeah, and just to add to what Hallie and Wendy said, I think you mentioned it earlier about talking about the dates, like the difference between dates between the US and Europe or Asia. This might sound super silly, but having a global KPI glossary with all the leaders aligned on what are the definitions, that is a super important aspect, and it's going to save you so much time on data reconciliation. So if you can get that done, that's like a very pragmatic first thing that you could do, especially in global teams. For those who have been working in global teams for a while, you know what it is to try to reconcile like headcount data between France and the US and China. So just simple things like that can make a huge difference in your time.
Distinction between headcount and HR and FTEs and finance.
Yep, yeah. that's a big one. I think it's one of the biggest misses. Companies don't put together that data dictionary early on and don't standardize their metrics. And things will always be added and changed. You can't prevent that, but having that starting place where exactly when you say turnover, is it 12-month annual rolling turnover? Is it, who's left in the last month? What are you talking about?
Yes. What we've seen is there's different layers that you have to consider. One is the connectivity of the data. So can you even get access to it? Can you move it? What quality processes have to be put on that data? So how well can you connect to it? Second is normalization, which exactly what you're talking about. So different countries reference and talk about things in different ways. So how do you normalize all the information in a way that makes it consumable? The next layer is distribution. So once I have it in a consumable form, can I get it to the stakeholders that need to have it to derive value from it? And then the fourth is sort of decisioning. So can we put it in a form and visualize it and realize it in a way that actually drives value-added decision making? And Gustavo, I think you made a great point earlier that's sort of the front end. You have to know what you're trying to achieve with the end stakeholder and the end user and what the value of that is, and then work through all those other layers. So what kind of connectivity do I need to have to realize that ROI? What sort of normalization do I need to do? How do I need to distribute it to get it to them? And then how do I want to bring it to life? So I think if you work back from what's that application of the information and what's the value of that application, and then work through those layers, you've got a systematic way to get to the value.
Amazing. We mentioned. Did anyone want to add anything else to that?
I would only just say start start kind of simple too. So we usually just make a 2x2 matrix, which is what information is known, and known basically means everybody has the same understanding of what that is. What is unknown, and then cutting through that, what do I need to know and what don't I need to know right now? And that just allows you to kind of, to Brian's point, really focus on how do you get to the application, the stuff that you need first, because then everything else will kind of, being a system, it's connected, everything else will kind of grow from there.
Mm-hmm. We mentioned earlier talking about kind of entering new markets, and we have people asking questions around that. Stephen, what should an organization plan for when entering new countries or regions, whether that be by expansion or M&A, to make the integration of new systems a fast and easy process, if that even exists?
Plan to adapt and plan to have lots of patience. Right. But no, I think a lot of it really depends on the reason for the expansion. And again, getting back to this point of what you're trying to consume from the data. I think a lot of the approach that Brian has been talking about, it really resonates with the way that I would look at that. So for instance, I would first try to figure out why we're doing something. What is the motivation, and how am I going to measure the return on that investment? Because what you don't want to do is spend a whole lot of time and effort to figure something out locally that actually doesn't even roll up into anything that you care about on a broader scale. Okay. And then from there, typically, if you can define how you're going to measure the return on investment, that means that you start to define the capabilities that you're after locally. So if it's a merger and acquisition, you might be buying, a product or market share, but do you need the sales channels? Do you not need the sales channels? And as you start to consider and create scenarios around that, you have to know the ins and outs of the law of the land as well. So in some organizations and in some countries, you can't actually model as part of a merger and acquisition staff that you think you won't need, because then you're predetermining their outcome. So it really kind of gets into understanding the capability piece and then defining your system. And for me, the system is beyond just integrating tools. So it's much more that holistic view of process, so how things get done, the organization, the location, the data itself, the applications and tools that you might use, but also that platform point, the technology on which that all resides, and understanding the relationships there. And then from there, it's really understanding how do we make these things talk to one another, and that normalization point. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of normalization. But the thing that I've kind of come across in my experience is everybody focuses, if you were to draw this map out, and you see process diagrams or you see like network models, people focus on the nodes or the boxes. And actually, when it comes to these kind of decisions and the hard work here, you actually have to focus on the lines that connect the boxes or the dots more so than the boxes themselves, because you know what those are. You know how an employee is described in another company that you might be looking at merging with or taking over or selling to. You know how employees are classified in Germany or France or Australia. But what you don't necessarily know is how you're going to extract and make two systems talk together or two nodes connect. So that normalization is hugely important. And then from there, exactly, you figure out how you manipulate that data, distribute it, and then consume it. And the whole point is to make sure that the tail of that ties back into the beginning, so that it always learns. But yeah, I would say just
simple as that.
Sorry?
Simple as that.
Simple as that. It's a system in a box.
Yeah. Anyone else to jump in on that?
Well, I'm going to look at it from the people side, because what Steve said is, I think, fantastic. Is looking at it from how do we design, but also from the people perspective. When you have these things happening, like acquisitions, integrations, what is typically the barriers for innovation? Is usually culture is a big one. Ability to to take action on things that are happening. How do you assimilate within the organizational culture? So there is definitely a component of the design, there is a part of the processes, but also in terms of the people, how do you make sure you can use analytics or data to assess the state of the culture and figure out what are the areas, or like the playbook, so to speak, in terms of alignment with the new processes, the new ways of working, how do we communicate, how do we make sure they feel included as part of the new organization? So all those things I feel are very important, and we have a role to play, obviously, in that space, because we are the ones who can, provide the tools and the data to help with that integration, from the people side and also obviously from the technology side.
I think it's also easy to say, like, a person's name, first name maps to first name, last name maps to last name, right? Like those are the easy attributes. Culture is not an easy attribute, right? Culture is not something you can observe, objectively. It is felt. It is, there's dimensions you can kind of start to measure, but it is not a visible, tangible, definite fact. And so how you can use analytics to even help kind of shape that and define that and understand that, whether it's, qualitative, feedback and collecting what, surveys, it's starting to put together some of the story there. So you can even see what the difference is, because culture is really a story that you tell yourself. Culture is really a story that you tell your employee base. It's not, again, it's not something that you can just measure.
Anyone, you want to jump in there, Wendy?
Well, I was just going to say it might be a bit of a tangent, but, Hallie, to your point about assessing culture, and Gustavo, you talk about how important that is as you go into, let's say, an acquisition. One of the things we're starting to focus on at Eaton is around organizational network analysis. And one of the things I've talked about with senior leaders is, if we have a really big acquisition and integration, wouldn't it be great to know already for our existing employees, who are the real integrators? Who are the people that we want to be a part of that integration team? Because they are so well connected in the organization that they can help drive some of that culture shift and help, align how we can best integrate this new acquired organization. So I think while culture is very hard to assess, I think leveraging some aspects of organizational network analysis might help us plug in just a little bit. And I think that's a role that analytics can play.
If I may say, this topic about O&I, so looking at networks of collaboration, it should teach us that this whole concept of teams in corporations is outdated. In my opinion, it's great to have competition within the organization to get better, but sometimes we get so caught up in the competitions among the teams that we don't realize we are not collaborating effectively. And by doing this kind of analysis, as you mentioned, Wendy, I think it helps open people's eyes to say, we're actually spending more time with people sometimes outside of our vertical team and collaborating more with them than actually what we're spending on a day-to-day basis. And I feel that if people can see it in that way and we can help unlock that visual, it's going to help the corporations be more effective, either in integrations or for regular corporations that are just doing their day-to-day activities.
I think now more than ever, especially where we have such a distributed workforce, we need to understand who are those change makers inside the organization to help us drive any change in the business as well. Talking of driving change, I'd love to hear from you, or I'll start with yourself, Wendy. What are some of the challenges and pitfalls that you've come across in your career when implementing your people analytics strategy that people perhaps can avoid moving forward? Because I'm sure it's not as easy as we're making it sound.
No, there are so many. I guess some of the things that come right to mind, many years ago, there was this common nomenclature of analytics maturity curve, right? And everybody saw those lines that you should start over here with kind of basic data and reporting, and you move all the way up to kind of advanced analytics and workforce planning. And I guess I'd say one of the pitfalls is I don't think it's a curve. It's all over the place, right? That any function, analytics function that says, well, we live at the top, we live at the advanced, I think is not telling the truth. Because the reality is, if you're doing it right, you could be doing some basic reporting and you see something that leads to a deep analytic project. And you can do a deep analytic project, and what comes out of it are some critical metrics that you now need to track because of new actions you're going to put in place. So now you're back to reporting. So the reality is that it's not kind of a linear that you get more mature. I think the trick is how do you have capabilities all along that spectrum so that you can ebb and flow. I think about my team at Eaton when COVID hit. I think we were very successful solely because we had capabilities along that spectrum so that we could pivot and ebb and flow based on what was needed at that specific time and do it very quickly. I think if we were only doing reporting, we wouldn't have been able to meet all the needs. And if we only had kind of advanced data scientists, really statistical prowess, we probably couldn't have been as agile and nimble to help with things that were immediate. So I think for me, that's a critical one. I guess I'd say a second one is, and you guys hear this all the time, having the business buy-in, right? So it's not about pushing capabilities and data and insights out. It's about having the business come to you based on what their challenges are. And I can't say that enough. I mean, having lived in consulting forever, I've talked before that, I think about all the time spent on a specific project with a client, and I would have pie chart, because, I'm numbers, I have to think about it as a pie chart. Half or more is about data preparation and analysis. And then this little tiny sliver is delivering results. When I've the other side, I would say 90% of your time is delivering the results. It's the socializing. Every project has legs that could be a year that you're still socializing those results. So I think recognizing that when we look inwardly, we think, the data is the data and the analysis, that's most important. I'd say, right. You have to have that right. That's table stakes, but it's how you socialize it and get the business to buy in so that they own the actions is probably the most important.
Yeah. As I hear you, no, I was to say, I completely agree. And you know what's the irony? We analytics teams sometimes are so in love with the analytics, like the modeling and the predictive capabilities and the simulation, all that stuff, that sometimes we lose track of the business. Meaning, to your point, Wendy, I think we need to have a philosophy of effort versus value. Meaning, if you are able to show to the business, hey, this is how we prioritize, and this is the value that you're getting from initiatives, then to your point, have that storytelling or that executive summary so the business understands how they are getting the value from it, is a much easier relationship between analytics and the business and finance, marketing, other areas as well. What ends up happening, and this is to me the irony, sometimes we have analytics teams that are the best doing numbers in the whole company, but we don't spend the time to kind of get our own story together or our own numbers together. Hey, how many people are using our tools? What is the adoption on those tools? What is the value that we're getting on ROI versus what they were doing before getting our tools versus now that they have them? Those simple questions, if we are able to answer those and have a good discipline for that then help you kind of unlock value for the business and allows you to get more buy-in from the business, operations, and so on in terms of the work that you do, right?
We often talk, I think the model of a data scientist is often called a unicorn, right? It's somebody who can do a little engineering and do a little analytics and also be a communicator. And I think more than probably any other area of the business, and I'm sure folks will fight me on this, but people analytics needs that communication, right? You need to be able to connect with the people and tell the story. And any analytics you do on the customer side, on whatever side, still needs a story. But here especially, we're most often not running production models. We're running insights, right? We're using that data to drive a story. And when people come to me and ask for data, I tell them I'm not going to give them data, right? I'm going to give them an insight. I'm going to give them a story. And sometimes that story may not even have numbers in it. And that is perfectly okay if that's what helps you understand the story. Because I know it's data-driven, right? It's a data-driven story. I've looked at the data. I've done the analysis. I've crafted the story. But if you're not going to understand what an odds ratio or what a coefficient is, right? I don't need to tell you that part. You don't need to see that. You just need to know that the outcome is this, and these are the ways we can action on it and the levers we can pull. And so I think that's one of the most important things that I emphasize when, stakeholders reach out and they say, I need this number or I need this data. Nope, it's a story I'm giving you back.
I saw a lot of nodding heads there.
Of having a data translator or a data journalist, you're seeing those terms become more prevalent because you can have the best data scientists, but if we can't convert that into the right story or the right message, it's just data. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm. And even some of the heads of people analytics that I interview and speak to, they tell me in other words that that's their role. It's to translate what the work that their team does to the business. So that's 80% of their role as the head of people analytics. Is not necessary to be doing the data work like you're describing. Is actually that middleman or a woman to translate that conversation, and that's the most difficult part of it. And I saw a lot of nodding heads through there, Hallie, and I'm assuming there was a lot of flashback moments of providing leaders loads of numbers and data and probably confusing them even more than they were beforehand as well.
So I'd say one added, hold on, frog in my throat. One added pitfall to avoid is and I've had this experience, sometimes in our advanced analytic work, we come out with new information that maybe we didn't know before. So let's take turnover modeling as an example, and the idea that I can run a model and I can get a risk likelihood. How likely is it that Gustavo is going to quit, right? I can get that probability for every individual. Will tell you, right, as you work in large global organizations, sometimes you can't do that, right? So how do you make sure that you're producing data that if you're operating in Germany or France, that you've got works councils that have approved that you can use the output of that analysis to then drive decisions about people? And so I think we also have to be cautious about what are the downstream implications or usage of the analytics that we produce.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if I can give an advice to leaders who are starting the organization with analytics, even if everything looks great on the PowerPoint, pilot a lot, learn from the pilot, start small, like I think Brian mentioned before, and then start growing from there. And in some cases, I do pilots in the US or China just to understand kind of the ins and outs of the kinks of it. And then I figure out, okay, maybe I need to see how then I translate this for Germany or Spain, because every country might have different things. But, that's one of the best things that I've learned through my career is pilot a lot and don't just trust in the data behind the computer, because sometimes you have to have that perspective and be with the operators or be, in front with the customers so you can truly understand what is going on, right? So,
so question for the other panelists. One of the things that I thought was interesting in our research, and obviously, can you all have you're all with organizations that have bought into the function, the expertise that you provide within HR, which in and of itself is a big win. And the reason I say that is, and this again was very surprising when you look at enterprise companies that we work with on the research, only 10% of enterprise-sized companies regularly use predictive analytics. And then when you extend that to occasionally, that only jumps to 17%. So over 3/4 of enterprise companies are rarely, if ever, using predictive analytics. So I wonder what you could tell folks, because your organizations are bought in, right? They've hired you, they've built out functions, they believe in the practice. What would be your advice to people that are with organizations that haven't quite seen that light? And based on the data that we're seeing, there's
I think
a good
from my
many.
perspective. Go ahead, Wendy.
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack in there, because as an organization, yes, Eaton is bought into it. If I were to answer that question, I might say we occasionally do predictive analytics, even with a function that's established, because to the point I made earlier, we don't do it every single day. We do it when there's a specific business need, and then that engagement might have legs of like 12 months. So I think it's a question of how do you get organizations to buy into the value of using data, people data, to drive decisions, whether that is driven by basic reporting, simple trends, descriptives, or predictive analytics. I think that's maybe one tool in the arsenal that I think all of us use, and not necessarily a tool that we're using every single day, nor should we. I mean, Hallie, you're nodding your head that you agree, but I cut off Gustavo. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I started my career in Sam's Club doing analytics for marketing strategy. And so to me, the answer to your question, Brian, is leadership. Meaning you have to have leaders who understand the value of it, how to use it, how to ask right questions. Because I started in 2005, and I'm telling you, I feel like I started in the future, so to speak. Very good data sets, very good questions. I got super lucky in the beginning of my career, and that helped me propel. By the time I got to kind of our HR function in Walmart, it was called the people division, the leadership had to make a choice. They could stand for doing all these advanced analytics cases, or they can just continue to do basic reporting. And they make a conscious effort to say, nope, this is the way we need to manage the function. Let's go to the board of directors and show them what we would like to do. And based on that pitch, and I'm very grateful to all the leadership that I had that was super, forward looking. and wanted to take that risk, that's because they saw that we had a 2.2 million employee population around the world, and we needed to have a function that was very robust. And that's how I got into that, basically environment that allows to thrive in analytics, and became one of the premier people analytics functions in the world based on the leadership piece. And now I've been to other companies that have started from scratch, and they believe in the function, but depending on the leadership that I see in different organizations, you can see how the function shapes up. Now I'm very lucky because I am in a place where there is a lot of usage of advanced analytics. There is a population of stakeholders that want to have even more. And I was just on Monday with our chief operating officer, and her message for the investor relationship group was, hey, we are investing on AI. Like, when you have people like that truly sponsor you and want to drive forward, that's when you can make, the function stay and be relevant and actually maximize the potential of the function.
So I agree, Gustavo, but I also think, we've got industry and we've got company age that are major factors in this as well. So one, completely agree with what Wendy was saying. Predictive analytics are not an everyday thing, nor should they be an everyday thing, right? There's a lot of questions that can be answered with much simpler analytics. And if it can be answered, 90% of the way with simpler analytics, do it with simpler analytics. No sense in, investing the time and resources to get the extra, 0.01% of precision. Probably not going to make a difference in our world. But when I think about industry and I think about age, 20, 25 years ago, the things we're doing today were appalling, right? You would never take people data and try to predict who was going to leave the company next, or look at, collecting attributes about race and sexual orientation to look at equity and diversity, right? These are things that, companies weren't used to doing. And so change is the hardest part, I think, for companies in industries that, kind of were not on the cutting edge of this work. I think you see a lot of technology companies, especially those born in the last 10, 15 years, that are very comfortable with this, that are very into predictive analytics. It's part of their customer portfolio as well. It's not new to them. They take advantage of it broadly. But I also think you've got companies that are used to doing things, a different way, and bringing them along on this journey and doing it in a way that is mindful of their data literacy, that is mindful of their comfort, right? It's not dive off the deep end and now we're doing organizational network analysis and predictive analytics and all kinds of fancy stuff. It's baby steps, right? It's here's the first little nugget I'm going to give you, digest, right? How do you react to that? What could I give differently next time? Now here's another little nugget. We start to build that groundswell. It's a snowball, right? We're spiraling. We're going to build a snowman at the end, but not at the beginning.
Yeah, and I'm sure you deal with this in terms of like having to deal with different leaders. Like some leaders, they expect from you that, just give me the report and access to data, and they are in that stage. And you have leaders who say, hey, what is happening with this new AI model? When are we going to have the next iteration? So, even within one organization, depending on the stakeholders that you have, you might be dealing with a total different maturity or data literacy or data appetite for whatever is needed for the organization. So, that's another area to think about as well.
I think, too, one thing I would just add is the external conditions. How do your customers expect your organization to behave with data now, right? And I'm finding that changes a lot. How do your employees expect you to use the information you hold about them to make their employment experience better? How do candidates expect to interact with you? We're seeing that now. People are saying, I've been locked down for several months. I've proven I don't need to come to the office to do my job. You know that. I know that. What are you going to do about it? Right. And the bartering power is changing. So I think it's absolutely fully agree. Leadership is a big part because if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to predict anything. Right. The ability of the organization is a part, but then those expectations of the people and the organizations that you need to collaborate with, partner with, or even just industry, back to one of the points made earlier, there are expectations and norms out there. And we see disruption like in fintech, for instance. Big banks in the UK were not prepared for the likes of Monzo, Revolut, and Sterling. If you miss it, you miss it, and then you're playing on the back foot. And consumers are moving faster than the organization.
The other thing is when I think about ROI, I think all of us most commonly think about what the ROI is for an organization. But there's also functional ROI, there's individual ROI, and then there are different flavors of ROI. There's sort of what I think of as rational ROI, which is the numbers. And then there's kind of emotional ROI. Does it make somebody's life better or their job better? And when I think about the application of analytics within the function of HR, what we've seen is for companies that are committed, that have that leadership, Gustavo, that are committed to the concept and the application of the tool, that there's ancillary ROI around what the perceived internal brand of the HR organization is. Suddenly they migrate and evolve from this tactical sort of operational function to a business partner. And that is a big deal for HR professionals. Most want to be seen as a strategic partner to the other functions, and not sort of this operational function that just, sort of manages benefits and payroll or whatever else. And then what we've also seen is we've seen drops in attrition rates within the HR function when there are improvements made in connectivity to data, integration, normalization, use of analytics, because what happens is the people that are doing those operational kind of, focused and spent the majority on their time on these operational activities, then get to evolve themselves. So there's personal ROI for them to say, hey, I can become a better HR professional. I can be a strategic partner to my stakeholders. I was never able to do that before. So I think there's really interesting sort of tangential ROI that could be realized that's outside of that sort of rational company ROI. We're going to be more efficient. We're going to reduce turnover, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
You sort of hijacked your agenda here, Chris.
This is great. Don't worry about it. So you do my job for me. It's fine.
I just add an anecdote to what Brian said. When I was in consulting, we found this interesting anomaly that when we worked with a CHRO doing kind of a big analytic effort, they often got promoted. We often found that whoever was our partner had a high likelihood of getting promoted. Now, I'm not saying causality, whatever, right? So the question is, right, is it the analytic work that allowed them to kind of be more strategic and therefore got promoted, or are these individuals who are more risk-taking by nature and therefore they were more likely to move up anyway? But it was always an interesting little anecdote that the people who we did that work with were the ones that ultimately, had a brand and a brand presence, and they were moving up because of it.
And I see that the same thing, Wendy, with our community and the people I interview every day. They're the ones that seem to be moving up the ladder very quickly, that are data-driven leaders. And also keep in mind, many of them, it's very new to them over the last 5 years. They've had to adapt and evolve and develop new competencies and new skills in this space. The skill set of a HR leader 10 years ago to where we are now is completely different end of the spectrum as well. So it's been they've gone for their own personal disruption and transformation along the way as well. I'm conscious of time. I didn't realize an hour went that fast. So before we wrap up, there's a lot to unpack. So hopefully everyone listening, they've probably got a big list of things to go away and do now. But if there's sort of one thing that you'd recommend people focus their time and energy on, sort of a parting piece of advice, kind of what would that be? I know it's quite hard given the broad spectrum we've covered. And also just, I think one of the powerful things about doing this and bringing us together is about networking and together. So where can people reach each of you to say hello if they want to reach out as well? I'll start with you, Gustavo.
Yeah, so first of all, you can reach out via LinkedIn, and usually I do my best to reply on time. But if I can give you one advice, and I'm going to be giving this advice repeatedly, is be bold. To your point, Chris, leaders who are taking chances and taking risks, especially in time of disruption, are the kind of leaders that we need. Don't get bogged down by the politics. Have your vision, your culture, bring your people along, but be bold, because we need you to take decisions quickly and decisively, especially in this time of disruption. So I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation. It's been great to talk to all the different panelists. And if anybody wants to, get additional thoughts, happy to talk offline at some point in the time. Thank you.
Amazing. Brian?
Yeah, so to reach me, LinkedIn, Brian Dames at safeguardglobal.com. I think to piggyback on what Gustavo was saying. I completely agree. I think, when I think about that stat, and I was surprised by just how much room there is for competitive advantage in companies of various sizes and various industries to start tapping into more advanced ways of analyzing data and decisioning on data. I completely agree that it will take some initiative and some boldness to go out and help others see the light within your organization. I think the most effective way to do that, so to get, sort of add on to that with some practicality, I think pick a particular stakeholder that you think is more forward thinking, that is faced with an issue that they're trying to solve for, and work back from what they're trying to solve for and figure out what data would need to be collected and normalized, all the things that we talked about, to help answer that, and use that as a showcase of what data and analytics can do for an HR organization. And then that becomes the platform, right? When people see a real case of data and analytics being applied to a particular issue and value being realized, then I think it feeds on itself, and other people say, hey, I want more of that. How do I get that? And then I think all of that ancillary value that we talked about, the perception of the function changes, the perception of the person that leads that effort changes, and all boats rise, right? The organization gets value, the function gets value, the person gets value.
And the customer gets value along the way as well. Thanks, Brian. Hallie?
Yeah, so LinkedIn also best place to reach
LinkedIn
me.
ad now. That's right.
And in terms of, kind of what's most important to start with, I think there's really two things. I can't decide between the two. I think one is relationships, right? You can have the best data in the world with the best systems in the world, and if no one's using them, then they're all for naught. They're not adding value. And so I think it's going out and understanding the pulse of the business, understanding the pulse of, your stakeholders, building that bridge so that they begin to have trust in you and, value your insights and really, begin to use them and visibly and demonstratably use them. I think those relationships are really the most important thing you can do as a people analytics leader. I also think being agile is critical. And as fast as we all move these days, the ability to pivot and pivot quickly and drop work midstream and pick up something else, right? You can never predict what's going to happen with your people, right? You might have a couple of people goals for the year, for the next couple of 3 to 5 years, and you can be working towards those goals and providing insights. But tomorrow, we all end up in a pandemic and you can't predict it. And you've got to be able to pivot and be agile. And so that agile thinking, I think, is really important to a data-driven mindset.
Even the people analytics function can't predict everything. So, Wendy?
So I can be reached at area code. It would also be LinkedIn. And Hallie, you stole mine. So when I was talking about the advice, it would be agility and being pragmatic, right? So again, my lesson learned, right? Coming in-house to do this work about how to just be very pragmatic, 80-20 rule. It doesn't always have to be big, heavy, weighty. It could be small, it can be quick. And so how do you balance that? Because I think that's where you'll get the best traction, and you'll get that more of that pull from the business, because they'll see, oh, I can go to the analytics team, and every time I go there, it isn't 6-month, effort of a project. I can go get what I need and make the decision I need.
Amazing. Last but not least, Steve, have they left anything for you?
Let me see. So LinkedIn is fine with me, or steve@beamery.com is also fine if anybody wants to have further conversation. I would say 2 things that I would recommend. First off, work out loud. Make sure that the organization knows what you're doing on, and in doing so, and share your work in progress. Share the quick and dirty stuff, because you will find that your people analytics team is far bigger than the people who have that in their job title. Very quickly, you get a lot of people that will be willing to help if you're working on something that's truly important for your business. And secondly, I would say one of the biggest challenges and where I see teams fail is that they can't put analytics into production. They treat everything like a project, and if they ever need to do that project again, they have to start from scratch and redo it because the data has shifted. Always try to think about, how do I make this so I can publish this, so that I can put it somewhere, and ideally even open it up so someone else can refresh it and use it again. That will help you with the business case, and that will help people see what you contribute on an ongoing basis. And that would be my words of wisdom.
Incredible. Well, look, thank you so much. What a way to end the year. This is the last panel discussion of the year. So thank you so much. What a year it's been so far. So thank you all for sharing your experience. I'm just going to say in advance that don't blame me that you get too many LinkedIn invitations. So I'm just going to put that out there now before you saying, Chris, what's happened to my LinkedIn feed? Big thank you to all of you for joining us. For everyone from listening around the world, thank you for tuning into the series. We've still got one more part of the series to go. So if you haven't already done so, make sure you hit the green follow button, and we're back again in January on Thursday the 28th for the next edition, so make sure you click that to stay notified. Obviously, special thanks to Safeguard Global as always for helping us bring this together. In the meantime, if you'd like to get a better understanding of Global Fluency, you can click the button directly below this video as well. Apart from that, stay safe, have a good new year, enjoy the rest of the year, and we'll look forward to seeing you in January. Bye for now. Thanks everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.
See you then. Take care.